It's just me. Just before we get rolling here, this afternoon, just a reminder, there's going to be when I put the thing on Facebook, I put the big game and I said no lawsuits. Anybody get that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You can't use the word Super Bowl?
Yeah, you can't use the term Super Bowl without paying the NFL for it.
Trademark that number?
Good. You got to pay everybody something. But yeah, so there will be a big game watch party here. The game starts at 4:30, so be here before that. Bring some food. The game will be on up to the time of services, and we'll go have worship service, and then we'll come back and wrap it up after services. The teens are also having a thing, so it's going to be kind of a group effort, but make plans for that. I didn't get the calendar finished, but I will try and have that ready for next week. I need to get some details on some of the kids' things coming up and etc. Okay, so our ordinary person for this week, we talked about Andrew last week, the apostle. So we're switching back to the ladies this week, and our ordinary person for this week is, come on, Ruth. So Ruth's story is an incredible story. It's a very compact story. It's by no means a long epic story like Abraham and Sarah. There's other women have bigger story. Esther, for instance, but Ruth's is an incredible picture. What I think you'll see with Ruth is in her account in this short book, we see God working from way back, pointing way forward. It's really a pretty cool picture. Before we get started, I asked Brad to lead us in a prayer. Do we have any prayer requests in particular this morning? How are you guys, by the way? Good, or good enough to be here? Good. 80%. That's good. That's not bad.
I just have not really a prayer request, just an update. Rusty's heart surgery went awesome.
Yeah, I saw that.
He went home Thursday to his parents' house and is recovering there, and he'll be able to go back to work about end of next week.
Okay, so Rusty Swift's heart surgery went well. And he should be back on his feet relatively soon. What else?
Update with me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not able to get into the TB clinic until March, so I'm just hoping that everything goes smooth and that they can get me in and start my treatment.
And things go well between now and then.
Yeah.
So Jackie's not going to be able to get into the TB, the tuberculosis clinic until March. So between now and then, pray that everything goes well and that once she's able to get in, they'll be able to get that squared away and get her treated and back where she needs to be. Anything else? All right, Brad, if you would, please.
Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for this day, and thank you for all your blessings, and thank you for sending your Son to die for our sins. And we also thank you for the weather that we've had, and the mild winter, and the snowfall in the mountains. We also ask that you watch over Rusty as he's recovering from his surgery, and thank you for that going well. Help him to recover quickly, and also be with Jackie as she's trying to wait for her visit to the clinic, and just watch over her and keep her TB at bay. And we also ask for those that are overseas and deployed fighting for freedom in Jesus' name.
Amen. Okay, so as we look at Ruth's life, you're probably familiar with the big picture story of Ruth. But like I said, it's a very compact story, just a short narrative, 85 verses for the whole thing. But in this story, there's just a whole range of emotions. There's sorrow, there's despair, there's desperation. I guess that's despair, just a different way to say it. But then there's joy, there's some intrigue. But in so many ways, her story is just a beautiful picture of redemption. And I really want you to focus on that. And, you know, there are a lot of Bible narratives, a lot of Bible accounts that people will say that this is just an allegory for something else. You know, there's claim that Jonah is an allegory, that Noah is an allegory. And Ruth is another one that people, there's some scholar people say that this is an analogy of it's just painting a picture for us. I don't believe that. I believe that the guy that she ends up with is in Jesus' lineage. So, I mean, this is a real deal. But I think what we see here is God working in so many ways that it looks like a setup. Because what she is really in so many ways is she's a very fitting image of every one of us. She is a stranger in a strange place. She's in a bad situation. She can't do anything really for herself. And she's redeemed. And it's just a great picture. But in order to understand her story, if you would go ahead and open your Bibles to Ruth, we're going to read probably more than I want to, but we're going to anyway because I can't help it. You have to start really with her ruin. I mean, and in order to see this, you kind of have to go back and look at her family before she even really comes into the picture. This is, as chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 say, this is at the end of the time of the judges. So Israel itself, the nation, is kind of in a little bit of turmoil, not really sure what to do. You know, if you read through the book of Judges, you see that the people are doing all right, and then it seems like every chapter begins with, and once again, the people did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So it's up and down. It's over and over like this. And it seems like this is a time of, well, it is a time of drought. We'll get to that. It's a time of actual drought, but it almost seems like it's a time of spiritual drought, as, like I said, as happens through the time of the Judges. This is about a century before the time of David. So we still have basically a generation to go before the people get their king and get what they want with their king, sort of. In verses 1 and 2, let's just look at 1 and 2. We're introduced to Ruth's father-in-law, who doesn't stick around very long. Verse 1, during the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. A man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites. That's a fun word to say. Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the fields of Moab and settled there. Now, in just those few words, we get really a pretty good picture of who these people are. They have to leave Bethlehem because of this famine. So that's their origin. We think of Bethlehem and we think what? Oh, little town of. Yeah, we obviously, Bethlehem is not known for that yet. We think of Bethlehem as the city of David. Not yet. Bethlehem's claim to fame right now is that it's the burial place of Rebecca. Rebecca? Yeah, no, Rachel, sorry. This is where Rachel's buried. That's really all the place is known for. The Ephrathites are considered to be kind of the upper crust of the Israelites. So Elimelech and his family are probably pretty well off, which tells you the extent of this famine, that these people are pretty well off and they still have to get out. So, where do they go? Moab. Tell me what you know about Moab, if anything.
To the east a little bit?
Let's see. Yes, to the east. This is Jerusalem, so Bethlehem is right over in here somewhere, I believe. So it's not terribly far away, but you know anything, any history, any context with Moab? Good people, bad people? Take a guess, you're probably right. Not exactly the best, yes. They're not good people. They're descendants of Lot. in a terrible way. Genesis 19 tells the story of Lot and his two daughters. Once they flee from Sodom and Gomorrah, and they won't stay in Zoar because Lot's convinced they'll get killed there. So they go and live in a cave. The daughters are like, this is terrible. I hate living in a cave. We're never going to get married. We're never going to have descendants. So they solve the problem with their father. And I'll just leave that at that. Go read it yourself. And the oldest of those two children, one from each daughter, is Moab. And although there's a family connection, we see in 1 Kings 3, we see in Judges 11, we see all throughout, off and on throughout Israel's history, they're always at war with these people. And I won't say always at war. They have wars with Moab, but there's always tension between them and Moab. So chances are the family went around this way and settled in Moab. Moab is by no means a resort area. Moab is kind of a desolate, treeless place. It is fertile in that it has grasses will grow. It's a place known for grazing. So that tells you a little bit more of the desperate. It's not like they're going from, western Kansas to Hawaii. I mean, it's not necessarily a great deal of an improvement, but it's better. And considering the history, it's a bad thing for people from Israel to go settle in Moab. Moab is one of the, I guess, every nation surrounding Israel that is polytheistic. They have several gods that they worship. Their, I guess, primary god is Shamash. And this is a tablet with the writings of Shamash on it. And these are two different images. I just put those up there to show you that even the people who worship this god aren't sure exactly what to do. I mean, there he doesn't look too terribly powerful. He has no arms. But Shamash worship was vulgar. It was like so many other pagan practices. It was very vulgar. Let's just leave it at that. There involved human sacrifice. It involved temple prostitutes. It just wasn't good stuff. And we even see in Numbers 25, Balak was the king of Moab who tried to get Balaam to prophesy against Israel. We see in there that the priestesses of Moab were inclined to, if not instructed to, try and befriend the men of Israel to get them to pull them away from their God. So just not a good situation. I say all of this to tell you, to show you the desperation that must have been there to go from Israel to Moab. This is kind of similar to what happened with Abraham. When he gets settled in that area and then there's a famine and he has to go to Egypt. But I mean, that's kind of what happens in those days. You don't just, you don't go to Costco and stock up. You got to go somewhere else because there's nothing there. So they have to leave Bethlehem and they move to Moab. And long story short, they move to Moab. Elimelech dies, leaves Naomi a widow. Then her two sons decide, well, we're stuck here, so what are we going to do? So their decision to marry Moabite women would have been highly inappropriate. And that's maybe being a little bit light. They were told in Leviticus and Deuteronomy to not take wives from other nations because they would pull you away from your God. But again, like I said, just to kind of get their mindset, these are people who are Israelites, a high-ranking Israelite family, a well-off Israel, a family who we'll see in Naomi has a good understanding of who Yahweh, who Jehovah God is. So you see their desperation when they get into Moab, and it looks like they feel like this is it. This is where we're stuck forever. So in order to continue their family, Chilion and Mahlon decide, well, we got to take Moabite wives. Like I said, I'm not defending their decision or whatever. I'm just saying maybe that's where they were. That what else are we going to do? So, okay, well, let's just move on. So then they take the two wives. Chilion marries marries Orpah. Ruth ends up with Mahlon. Well then, so they try and settle in, and the text says they were there for 10 years. It seems like it is from the time they get there, then there's time for them to meet these guys, then they're there. Because, I mean, if they were married for 10 years and they still didn't have children, that would be very unusual. So it seems like that's the time frame for all of it. But it apparently there's a sense of being trapped by their circumstances. So, as the story gets worse, Mahlon and Chilion, as you know, they both die. Okay, so where does that leave Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah? They're all three widows. Where does that leave them? In need. Why? Yeah, what could happen and is okay to happen, the daughters can leave Naomi. There's no one to provide for them now. If Naomi would have just been a widow, she would still have her sons who could take care of her. She'd be grieving and horrible and everything, but she'd be taken care of. Sons are gone now. A common route for widows in that day, especially young widows, what are they going to do? I mean, they can't go get a job. It's not proper in their culture. So they turn to selling themselves. And now we've got Naomi, who is older, and her two daughters-in-law with nowhere to go. So they're in a bad situation. Look at 6 through 14. This is kind of a long stretch here, but you got to just see this, the desperation here. Beginning in verse 6 says, she and her daughters-in-law set out to return from the territory of Moab because she had heard in Moab that the Lord had paid attention to his people's need by providing them food. So Naomi hears the famine, the famine has broken, that there's food now in Israel. So she goes, okay, let's go back over the Dead Sea and get back home. She left the place where she had been living, accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, and traveled along the road leading back into the land of Judah. Naomi said to them, each of you go back to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to the dead and to me. May the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband. She kissed them and they wept loudly. They said to her, we insist on returning with you to your people. But Naomi replied, return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters. My life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Again they wept loudly, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. What do you see there?
Naomi sounds pretty defeated.
Naomi sounds whipped. She's done. What else?
Well, the daughters-in-law obviously thought very highly of their mother-in-law, and maybe that's because of her Christian or Judaism. Maybe the sons were killed because that culture was very violent for half of that time, and maybe they saw a side of her, and that's why they said, we'll have our gods be your gods, essentially. They saw something in her.
Yeah, it seems like, and if you notice, if you read through what Naomi has to say, she's telling them, go back home. She's releasing them, which was her right, which was normal. She says, go back to your mom's house. I'm not going to have any more husbands. I'm not going to get married. If I got married tonight and had a baby tonight, what are you going to wait 20 years till he's old enough to remarry and you're 50 or whatever? I mean, so she's being facetious because she's going, there is no hope here. But if you read through that, and if your Bible, like most Bibles, look at the number of times in what she's saying there is the Lord in all caps. She's reminding them, these Moabite women who more than likely grew up worshiping Shamash and Molech and some of these awful made-up gods. She's reminding them that may the Lord may Jehovah take care of you. May Jehovah bless you. And she does say, his hand is turned against me, but she says, maybe he'll take care of you. So she's even dropping those little reminders of who God is. And her daughters obviously see something in her. Her daughters have some sort of connection to her. And, I mean, this is such a sad scene. I mean, this is... How many of you seen Up? Did you go to see Up the first time thinking, yeah, Pixar movie, and 8 minutes into it, you're bawling? That's Ruth. You go to see the movie Ruth, and it starts out, they're moving across country. Oh, it's too bad. Oh, her husband. Oh, her son. I mean, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then they have this conversation where she says, no, go home. And it says they weep loudly because, I mean, there's obviously connection here. But eventually Orpah says, all right, okay, I guess I'll go home. But Ruth, the last part there of verse, whatever it is, 15 or 16, says Ruth clings to her. So now we see Ruth's resolve to stay with her mother. Look at verse 15. Or somebody read verse 15, please.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
I don't want to totally derail your class, but maybe I will. For the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Is that it's tough when you're down. Is that an okay conclusion to come to? I'm still...
Let's pause on that for just, let's remember that. What is it okay for her to say that? Don't answer, but keep that in the back of your head. Now, John, since you tried to take over, you read verse 15.
And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law.
Okay. Ruth, or Naomi, obviously has a relationship and understanding of Jehovah God. Obviously has some affection for her daughters-in-law. Why would she say this? Why would she say, go back home? What's home? Moab, false gods, bad people. It almost seems, and I never really thought about this before, but it almost kind of seems like maybe Naomi's maybe testing her. Really, you're going to come with me? Listen, go back home. Maybe she's saying, really, if you're going to come with me, think about what you're deciding to do here. You're going to be a Moabitess, an Israelite. We don't like you. You're going to be a widow. It's going to be hard. And you're going to have to take care of me because I'm old. So it almost seems like she's putting these things in front of her to say, listen, your easy route is to go back home. Now, look at 16 and 17. How many of you have had these verses read in your wedding? Anybody? Have you heard them read in a wedding? I've done it in 2 weddings. Verse 16, don't plead with me to abandon you or to return and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me and do so severely if anything but death separates you and me. How many of you have ever read these standing face to face with your mother-in-law? Nobody? How tender are those words? I mean, like I said, those are wedding words that we yank out of the context and apply them to husband and wife because they're great words. But this is her to her mother-in-law. And she goes, where you go, I go. Where you die, I die. Everything about you is now me. Adam.
So I find it interesting that Orpah says the Lord has raised his fist against me, but Ruth is the antithesis of that. Like her sons are gone, her grandkids, like all of the male know because she's in the lineage of Christ, Ruth is the antithesis of that. Ruth is God's will staying with Orpah.
Yeah.
Right? So I think Ruth is, although Orpah feels like God's turned her back on him, and Ruth is sticking it out in a way I think that is honoring God.
Okay, think about what Adam just said. This is Ruth doing something that is contrary to what culture would do, and she is paraphrasing, she is fulfilling what God's plan is going to be. Think of that. And like I said, there are people who will say this is all analogy, this is all a picture. This is a woman, well, I'll get back to that.
Well,
But
her sister-in-law is like, oh yeah, you're screwed, right?
Yeah.
You're stuck. I'm leaving. But Ruth doesn't.
yeah, there's this connection that it even seems like Orpah has a little bit of a struggle because they weep together and she's sad and then she's like, you know, you're right. I'm going home. And I mean, and I'm sure it wasn't a flippant decision. But still, Ruth says, no, you're my family now. And maybe that was in her best interest. I don't know how. I mean, seems like if you're going to be a widow, the best place for you to be is home.
I think it's interesting too because I mean it mentions her father and mother later on too, and so her father was still alive, which in that time, you know, women by themselves, you don't make it.
Yeah.
You either get married or you don't make it.
Yeah.
And so because her father was still alive, I wonder if after her husband passed away, if her father and mother were telling her, you need to come home because there's little faith that we have in you surviving on your own as a woman.
Oh, yeah.
Alone with an older woman that you have to take care of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Could you imagine the pressure from home? Don't go with this lady. What are you doing? I mean, you come home to us. We're your family, not these people. But Ruth decides to go with her, and they get back to Bethlehem, and the people recognize Naomi. Naomi's name means pleasant. Oh, by the way, Ruth's name means friendship. Orpah's name means, where'd it go? Lost him. Orpah is stubborn. I guess Ruth could be a little bit stubborn too, I guess. But they get home. Look at verses, where'd it go? 20 and 21. The whole town, verse 18, 19, whole town sees her. They're excited. Woo, it's Naomi. Verse 20, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, she answered. For the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord, Jehovah, the Lord brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me? Okay, so to John's question. What is she saying here? Okay, let me just be fair. If we could skip forward and look at everything else Naomi does. Look at what she said about sending Orpah, sending Ruth home. May Jehovah bless you. May Jehovah take care of you. For me, it's not great. And she gets home. They say, Naomi, pleasant. She goes, no. Mara, bitter. That's who I am now. But if you look forward at how she relates to God still, what's she saying here? Who does this remind you of? Any other Bible character? Who said that? Job. I wish I'd never been born. God won't even listen to me. Is that okay? Job is the book of, is it okay for me to say? How about David? God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Is it okay for us to say that kind of stuff? Obviously. I mean, you look through some of David's Psalms. We did a class in the auditorium a year or so ago going through some of the Psalms and the seasons of the Psalms. And so many of them, David starts like that. Man, things are terrible, God. Why have you done this? How come you don't pay attention? You don't do anything for me? And then what I call the deep breath moment, where you can see him go, but you're my hope. You're my refuge. You're the only place I can go. What I think, yes, sir.
I was just going to mention, without doubt, you really cannot discover what the truth is.
Oh, yeah.
When you begin to
Yeah.
That's how you begin to increase your faith.
Yeah, doubt and questioning are the roads to discovery. John.
I was going to say, I think we do it today. Sometimes we don't do it verbally, we do it with our actions, by how we behave.
Yeah. So, sometimes we live doubt. We might not say, and sometimes I think, I think, just speaking for myself, I'm afraid to say, God, what are you doing? Why'd you do this to me? Because I'm afraid God's going to go, because you deserve it.
I think we tend to judge people that are recorded in the Bible a lot more harshly than we judge ourselves.
Yeah, because it's on paper. Yeah, and we can look what she said. That's so terrible. Look what Job said. Look what these people did. But it almost seems like, and maybe I'm justifying this lady, I don't know. But because of what bookends her, where you see her trust in God to take care of her daughters, you see her trust later as this whole story unfolds. It seems like she's saying the situation is bitter. God has allowed this to happen to me right now, and maybe she is bitter. But it seems like she is at a point where she's just like, things are not going my way. It doesn't seem like she's lost her faith, because she's the same person later.
So to focus back on Ruth, like I wonder, as Naomi tells these people, "Oh, my name's Mara," what is Ruth feeling?
Yeah.
Right? She's decided, yeah, I'm going to stick with my mother-in-law. I'm going to go, be with her. And you think, okay, at least maybe I've given her something to be happy about. Maybe I can turn her attitude around. And I see Ruth just being right there, just like, oh, come on. Really? You're going to change your name to bitter? Like, I wonder what Ruth is thinking in this moment as her mother-in-law announces her name.
What I have in my notes, I imagine Ruth going, really? Thanks. I came this whole way with you, and you get to be, and you don't introduce me to anybody. It's like, I'm bitter.
How about your name be sour?
Yeah. How about my name is Bummer? Or, just, it's kind of a bum deal right now. But anyway, yes. Think about Ruth. What we see is Naomi, to go back to John's question, what I see this kind of from Naomi as a lament. David does it. We see it all through Scripture, that she is just down right now. And she gets back and she goes, you know what? Don't even call me that anymore. Just give me some time, blah, blah, blah. Then Ruth, they get back to Bethlehem, and it's the beginning, it says, of the harvest.
Yeah, just a slight different look at how Ruth's attitude for the situation. She may have the ability as an encourager. She sees how desperate Naomi feels her situation is, but Ruth has the patience to endure her sadness.
Absolutely.
So she might have felt all those things we've speculated on, but she also might have been very encouraging and uplifting to her, and knew that, well, I'm going to be there for you. You can feel the way that you feel, but I'm still here for you because I love you so much.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. What we see is Ruth's character, because her mother-in-law just said all this stuff, and the next thing we see from her in chapter 2, verse 2 is, will you let me go in the fields and gather grain for us? I'm not holding this against you. I get it. Things are bad right now. But I'm going to go do my part. And we're introduced to Boaz. Boaz, it says, is called the son of Rahab. Obviously, he's not the son of Rahab. He's like the great-grandson. It's like what Matthew does in the genealogy. It's a very Hebrew, Jewish thing. Sometimes in the genealogy, you skip from famous guy to famous guy. You leave out Larry and Bob and Steve, the people that nobody knows. You go from the names to the names. And so we get this first introduction of Boaz. I'm going to have to kind of hurry through this now. And this is where we begin to see Ruth's redemption. She sees, what's owed her when she gets to Israel? By Jewish law, what's owed her? Not yet. They're told in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy, to leave the droppings on the field, the droppings of the scatterings of your harvest for the stranger, the corners of your field for the traveler. There's something available for her, but it's her and her mother-in-law. And Naomi's not going to get out and gather anything. So she's in Israel, where somehow she's made to understand that she can go out and gather up these scraps. And she goes out and gets to work. Now, there's all sorts of messages there for men and women. But could she have gone back and sat in the house with Naomi for days and wept and complained and cried and been miserable? Sure. That wasn't her choice. She gets back, even though this whole situation with Naomi saying, call me bitter, because I drug my daughter-in-law back with me. But Ruth goes right to work. And in coming back with Naomi, it's understood she's agreeing to help her. I mean, she's not going, yeah, I'll move back with you, and then I'll probably move over to Bethany or somewhere, and I'll come visit you on the weekends. I mean, she's like, she's in this now. Man. And Boaz sees her out working, and he asks, just paraphrasing this story, he says, who's this lady? And his servants say, and Boaz probably comes to his fields every day to check and see how things are going. He sees this stranger working hard, and she catches his attention. And from what the information that he gathers, he realizes this is family. This is some extended family here. And he sees her care for her mother-in-law. He sees her approach to how she's dealing with all this. Ruth comes back, and this is again this is where we see the character of Naomi reflected again. Because when she comes back, Naomi is saying, this is God in this. This is Jehovah taking care of us. So, like I said, bookend her bad moment with the other things she says, and I think we can see a bad moment. But she sees this as their answer. Now, this is where I wanted to spend a lot more time. The word where she calls a close relative is the word goel. And it is, sometimes we see it in the Old Testament as kinsman redeemer. It can be seen as avenger. It can be seen as some other word. But anyway, but this is not something that is unique to Ruth. This is one of those things I think sometimes we think that Ruth and Boaz, the only time we see this kinsman redeemer, this goel. It's not. This is if you want to study this, you see this over and over in the Old Testament, the concept of it. It's called the Levirate marriage. That if a married couple, if the husband dies and he has a single brother, it's that brother's obligation to marry his wife, because the family has to continue. He can't leave her alone. Naomi sees that in Ruth, in Boaz. He's probably a cousin of Elimelech, maybe a nephew, which, again, that's common in their era. But this picture here, and again, this is what I want to point out, so we're going to have to hurry. Naomi comes up with what would have been a shocking plan. She basically tells Ruth, go ask him to marry you, but don't say the words. I mean, that's really what she does. You have to kind of read through it. She goes and she presents herself to him and is pleasant and is nice and everything is good. And Boaz takes care of her. He says, okay, go home. You don't want to be here. You don't want people to see you here, because she's laying at his feet. You know the story kind of. But he says, go. But this is what I want you to think about. This kinsman redeemer that we see first in Deuteronomy. We see it throughout the Old Testament. And then in Ruth, in Boaz, who is, from their lineage comes Jesus. We see this picture of God working way back to paint this picture of a redeemer. To paint this picture of someone who will take somebody. You see it in Hosea, it's a different family, but we see the same concept of this idea of God saying, pay attention to these kind of stories. Because, yeah, it's a beautiful love story, but you're going to see a picture. It's almost like Old Testament people, New Testament people could read the story of Ruth and go, that's so sweet that somebody who didn't have to do anything bought her back and saved her from a terrible situation and made her life. Hey, That's kind of what Jesus does. I mean, it's like God set this up throughout history and says, look at this story. And that's who he is. So let's look at some lessons. Hang on, Nathan. Naomi's faith. Up and down, we admit it. But she clung to Jehovah God and influenced her daughter-in-law, who then married Boaz, who from them comes David, from them comes Jesus. What an incredible influence just that clinging faith can have. For their specific situation, moms, grandmas. I mean, you look at Timothy with Lois and Eunice. I mean, Paul reminds him the great influence those women were in his life. With Naomi, what an incredible influence she was. Ruth is redeemed to a position of great favor, just like we. And like I said, that I think is what is so incredible about this story, is that we see a person who is in desperate situation, who can't do anything for herself. I mean, she could do a little bit, and she wasn't going to starve. But I think the whole point is for us to think about the price that's paid for our redemption. When we think about literally where Jesus comes from, he comes from this family. And maybe it is that Boaz, knowing his descendancy from Rahab, maybe that makes him a little bit soft toward Ruth. Another woman who comes from a bad situation, he thinks, it's kind of like great-grandma Rahab or whatever. But the picture we see down through this whole story, from the law of Moses, this levirate marriage, this whole idea of kinsman redeemer, comes to Jesus. And it's just like, that's for us to read these accounts and go, wow, that's kind of like Jesus. I think that's God's point, is look at these real life people living this stuff out, and that's what we get in Christ. Nathan, what were you going to say?
I was just going to, one last point, is Jesus brought back the prophet going to the woman, the widow, who wasn't an Israelite. And he talked about, it's so interesting how so many times, it's somebody that's not a Jew that does the right thing.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'd say is just how hard it would be for a Jewish person to put this book in the Bible when it's basically giving a foreigner all the praise.
Oh, yeah.
Naomi actually kind of looks like the faithless one. She's the one that changed her name. She's the one that basically is embittered. She's the one that is trying to have her go seduce Boaz, because she's trying to do it her way.
Yeah.
And the foreigner is the one that does it the right way, and it just kind of shows sometimes even the Jewish servants were kind of giving her a hard time.
Yeah.
Clean stuff. It's just, so interesting how the foreigner sometimes could be actually more godly than the
and it kind of gives some legitimacy to the Bible. The fact that the Jews weren't going to make this up and stick this book in there. They don't want the Moabite to look like the heroine of the story. But it is. It's a great picture that anybody of faith can become somebody that God works with, even if they're just an ordinary person. We're out.